Not every episode that I create is going to resonate with you, and that's okay. Just because one episode doesn't resonate with you doesn't mean that you aren't dealing with covert narcissism or that you can't get knowledge and awareness and understanding from some of these episodes. Because covert narcissism exists on a spectrum like so many other things in life. Not all of these traits show up the same way, or they might not all show up the same time or the same phase of life. So just because your spouse doesn't do this one thing or that one thing doesn't mean you aren't dealing with narcissism. And just because you see some narcissistic traits doesn't make that person a full blown narcissist. There are so many variations here and so many different ways that all of this shows up. The narcissism you're living with might look different from the examples that I share, or even from what someone else in this community is experiencing. Not only that, it might look different tomorrow than it does today, and that looks different than it did yesterday. So this is a very confusing topic to talk about. It's really hard to kind of wrap your head around, and it's really easy to fall back on, maybe this is not what I'm dealing with. Maybe I'm making too much of this. Welcome back to the Covert Narcissism podcast, where we explore the gray areas that no one else is talking about. When you first start learning about covert narcissism, it is natural to go down a checklist. Silent treatment, check. Guilt trips, check. Circular conversations, check. Martyrdom, check. And then you hit something that doesn't quite fit. They go into a rage. No, that doesn't fit. They flirt with others. No, that doesn't fit. They play the victim in public. No, that doesn't fit. They're charming in public. No, I wouldn't even quite say that. And suddenly you start doubting yourself. Maybe this isn't narcissism. Maybe I'm overreacting. But here's the truth. Covert narcissism does not come with a script. It's not a box to check. It's a pattern. It's a pattern of emotional manipulation, entitlement, a lack of empathy that shows up differently depending on the person and depending on the moment. Some covert narcissists are icy and withdrawn, isolated, cold. Others are charming and actually self-deprecating. Some lean on guilt and blame, while others lean on fear and shame. Some cry and sulk, and some quote scripture or talk about family values. The core is the same, though. They twist reality to protect their fragile ego. It's the packaging that can look different and can actually change every single day within your relationship. One woman told me he never yells, but the silence is suffocating. He doesn't raise his voice, he just withholds it. Another one said, mine cries every time I bring up a problem. He weaponizes his tears to shut down the conversation. For someone else, it shows up as sarcasm. And when they try to voice, their concern or their hurt feelings to their partner, they get, I was just kidding. Boy, you're too sensitive. Everything's always a joke, but it's never followed with an apology. For another, it's intellectual superiority. You just don't understand how complex I am. Some use their generosity as leverage. After everything I've done for you? Others use faith. A good wife forgives, doesn't she? Some retreat into depression, and you feel guilty for even having needs to begin with. These are all different faces, but the same result: control. That's why when you talk to another survivor and their story sounds different, it doesn't mean that one of you is wrong. It just means you were dealing with a different flavor of the same poison. I once had a client who said, Renee, everything you described fits perfectly, except one thing. My husband never disrespected my boundaries. He doesn't invade my space or snoop through my messages. That's just not who he is. I nodded and I said, okay, that's fine, but that doesn't change all the other things that are going on. But just, keep that in your notes and put it off to the side. Well, a few weeks later, she met back with me again. She was shaken to her core. She had discovered that he had been secretly recording her therapy sessions by hiding a device in her car. That thing that she thought he never would do, that moment arrived. And you see, that's the thing about covert narcissism. It's actually often progressive. When one form of control stops working, another takes its place. When there's that one thing that you think, well, that my spouse doesn't do this. At least they would never do that. And then all of a sudden it shows up. When their charm stops getting you to cooperate, they might switch to guilt. And when guilt stops working, they might switch to silence or fear. The traits are fluid because they're tools, not personality quirks. They're tools. They're tools for manipulation. They're tools for control. And they'll use whatever tool gets the job done in that moment. I'll give you some more they would never do this examples. Somebody says to me, he would never cheat. And then she found secret messages online. Someone said to me, she would never lie to the kids. But then she twisted every story and made him the villain. Someone else said to me, he would never raise his voice. Well, maybe not, but he slams the cabinets and stomps around the house instead. Another client said she would never abandon me until he stopped feeding her ego and she was gone overnight. That's why this is so confusing, because they don't always show all the traits, all the tools, all the signs of narcissism. They show just enough to keep you hooked, just enough good to keep you hooked, and just enough bad to keep you confused and second-guessing yourself. Think of narcissism more like a dimmer switch than an on and off light. It's not, on and off, like very abrupt. Some days it's low, barely noticeable, almost normal. Other days it's blinding. It's more like a dimmer switch. And it varies by context, too. They might be charming and generous when they're with friends, and then cold and withdrawn at home. They might play the humble hero in public, but act entitled and cruel behind closed doors. That inconsistency is part of what makes this so incredibly frustrating, just massively disorienting. You start to question your memory, your judgment, even your own sanity. You tell yourself, maybe I exaggerated. Maybe it's not that bad. But you're not imagining this. If you've found yourself living in that confusion, living in that, disorienting space where you feel like you're in the twilight zone, walking on quicksand all the time, that's because you're dealing with somebody who is manipulative, who is toxic, who is controlling the narrative that's influencing your perspective and not giving you the space for your own perspective. All of that falls into the category of covert narcissism. It's just that these behaviors, they exist on a sliding scale. And the more you speak truth, hold boundaries, or stop appeasing them, the faster that dimmer switch flicks from low to high. One day they're complimenting your cooking, and the next day, after you've prepared a great meal, they decide instead to hop in the car and go buy some fast food and bring it home. One day they're affectionate in the morning, but cold and distant by dinner. One day they're the devoted parent on Instagram, but their child says mom or dad never listens to me. One day they're the helpful neighbor who mows the lawn for others, but ignores the chaos in their own home. They're the nice guy or the nice girl that everyone loves, except the people who actually live with them. If you've ever felt like you're living in two parallel realities, one that the world sees and one that you experience, you might be dealing with covert narcissism. That's what it means to live with someone who's on this spectrum. Part of what keeps survivors stuck is the constant comparison. You might think, but they're not as bad as my friend's ex. Or at least they didn't hit me. Or they're not screaming at me, so maybe it's not that bad. But the damage is not measured in decibels. It's measured in impact. It's measured in how small you've had to become in order to keep the peace. How much of yourself you've silenced to avoid conflict. How much time you spend trying to decode the unspoken rules that keep changing every day. That's what covert narcissism does. It trains you to normalize confusion and chaos. Some covert narcissists are emotional hostages. I can't live without you. How will I survive? Some are passive aggressive martyrs. I guess I'll just do everything myself. Some are intellectual manipulators. You're misinterpreting what I said. Some are religious justifiers. You're not being a godly partner. Some are social charmers. Everyone loves me. Why don't you? Some are fragile victims. I've had such a hard life. You just don't understand. And some are quiet punishers. No words, just the cold shoulder for days. The variety is endless, but the result is the same: confusion and control. If one of the episodes that you've recently listened to doesn't sound exactly like your story, that's okay. Like I said, it's many different flavors of the same poison. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It means your story is yours, and my story is mine, and all the other people in this community, their story is theirs. And that's what makes this work so important. You might relate to one episode, but not the next, because the covert narcissist in your life uses a different set of tools than the one in mine. But the foundation is the same: manipulation without accountability, connection without empathy, which I don't, how do we do that? And love that comes with strings attached, which is how that connection happens. When you start seeing those strings, you start seeing the pattern. And once you see the pattern, you can stop trying to fix it and instead start freeing yourself from it. If you've ever wondered, why does every conversation turn into confusion? You're not crazy. You're just in a relationship where clarity is dangerous, because clarity threatens their control. And your longing for peace, that's not weakness. That's your intuition trying to lead you home back to you. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, your experience might not match someone else's, but that doesn't make it any less valid. Covert narcissism is on a spectrum, and however it showed up in your life, the confusion that you felt was extremely real. You're not overreacting, you're just waking up. Welcome back to your truth. I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. The information provided by Renee Swanson, Covert Narcissism Podcast, and CNG Life Coaching is for educational purposes only and is not to be used for diagnosis purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for clinical care. Please consult a healthcare provider for guidance specific to your case. This material discusses narcissism in general. Renee shares stories from her personal experience as well as from those that she has worked with for several years. Her material does not claim that any specific person has narcissism and should not be used to refer to any specific person as having narcissism. Permission is not granted to link to or repost this material to support an allegation or support a claim that any specific person is a narcissist. That would be an unauthorized misuse of the material and the information provided. Thank you.